Welcome to The Next Stage, the podcast where we turn up the house lights on the future of venue management. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just getting started, this is your go-to source for the latest trends, innovations, and best practices in the venue and event management industry.
The amount of information and the amount of change and the amount of opportunity has never been greater.
We've literally broken down walls and we're looking at how can we create a more seamless experience.
There's customer demand for sustainability now.
On the forefront when it comes to venues that might not look like what you think of as a venue today.
Welcome back to The Next Stage. I'm your host, VMA CEO Joel Edmondson, and with me today is Adam Cheyne, CEO of the Sports Environment Alliance. Welcome, Adam.
G'day, Joel. Great to be here. Appreciate it.
Mate, great to have you with us. We are going to discuss a range of things related to sustainability and making change today, but you do that in a very specific context in your job with SEA. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about SEA to kick us off?
Yeah, if no one's heard of Sports Environment Alliance, we're a not-for-profit member industry organisation. We've been around and founded since about 2015. So we've been around the network and industry for quite some time. And put it in a nutshell, we use the power of sport, climate, environment to create action, whether it's your sustainability journey, growing your events, improving your facility and venue management. So make sure you're on that kind of cutting edge or pathway to sustainability and climate action. That's a key element of C. So you come to us for a network, education, training and development, but also advocacy. And it's great to be connecting with your stakeholders today, Joel.
Great, because we share a lot of those together. You just mentioned that sport's a vehicle for change. What is it about sport that makes it such a great vehicle for that?
Yeah, but the privilege of being in this role and coming from both a sporting and urban planning background, that I can try to bring those two fields together of personally my interest into this organisation. And I really enjoy the cultural link that we have as sport. So you look at it in terms of our homes and lives of growing up, we're all kind of at the sporting field or the court or watching our brothers, sisters, aunties, uncles, grandparents out there being physically active from when we grow up all the way to the elite stage. So it's very intrinsically connected to us, the power of sport, basically from our community level all the way through to the elite, and where we aspire and we try and seek that innovation and hope through the world stage, be the Olympics, your favourite footy team, or an athlete just on the world stage doing their thing. So that real cultural identity of sport is a really great driver for the climate and environmental discussion, and it's very powerful in the short time that I've been in this chair.
In a practical sense, what are the sustainability related issues more broadly that sport deals with? So we'll get into the real weeds of that later, but just so people have a bit of a sense of really where your interface is with your members.
Yeah, historically it was the event side and the facility space, and we really saw events in terms of wanting to minimise and improve their environmental impact, especially when you're on the grand stage with media, fans, participants coming all over the world. There was a kind of real action as to how event delivery can change and look at ways different to where we can use materials, plastic, or innovation where it is with energy. So I use that as kind of a broad example and context, because a lot of the work that we're seeing with our stakeholders is really focused on that energy transition, particularly as we seek to go to net zero as a country and states and territories with different goals and ambitions as organisations, but also the waste journey, minimising our impact from what we're doing on game day or year round at an operation or a leisure centre, and minimising that impact as to what's going into the biodiversity, water streams, landfill, and creating a real impact of change, be it that one individual at the sporting club through to a whole brand, be it a national sporting organisation, a world-leading event like the Australian Open or Australian Grand Prix, and setting that as a catalyst of change that it can be done. And now we've got that innovation and case studies to take that on board. So it's a very broad gamut and wide range of activities. But yeah, we try and make sure that education, climate literacy, and really understanding that you can start from no understanding or we understand that this is a very science-based industry. So basically just understanding where to recycle and improve in your own environment is the small changes that get you more and more on that ladder across your climate environmental journey.
You mentioned, work across different states. Is there any barrier to change in Australia due to there being regulations that are different in different states?
Yeah, I would say we kind of have a few lenses. So local government, state, territory government and federal governments all operate in very different realms, as you know, through the stakeholders that are part of your membership. Federally, there's those national ambitions of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and meeting net zero targets, but also kind of policies and requirements as it relates to the urban and built form of Australia and our biodiversity. Each state and territory goes through cycles of the political cycle in terms of their ambition and goals, and you will see where innovation is really focused in states like Brisbane and Queensland, for example, with Brisbane 2032, where legacy is going to be a key part of the journey of sport and over the next 7 years. So the discussion of climate impact and what we're leaving as testimonial or legacy to the games is a real focus potentially for the Queensland government. And you look at historically with states like Western Australia, we do a lot of work at a community level with waste education, with community clubs, all the way through to professional AFL teams such as the Fremantle Dockers and West Coast Eagles. And each state's really have their own identified pathway of education and advocacy in which they're trying to achieve. So it's a really broad statement, that, Joel, but there's a lot of action that happens in unique government departments, leaders within each government territory, and it's us trying to work with our network to find those sweet spots where we can create that action and support changes, particularly in the facilities and venue spaces, Joel, because that's the home of it all, and that's where people are going, participating, and they see that as the real four walls or the court or the green open space in which they're participating in sport.
I noticed when I was in my previous role, I was working in a sort of Olympics adjacent space, and at the time I was looking into this sustainability stuff with the Olympics in Paris at the time, because they obviously have, so much development there already. They had a real stated focus around sustainability. Do you know whether there's anything we can learn from what happened in Paris in terms of making the games in Brisbane more sustainable?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the International Olympic Committee is playing a significant role in that benchmark. And I think Paris was really that first one of significant action in the climate, environment and sustainability space. Like, you saw them regenerate a river to make it possible to swim. And the investment that went into those elements in terms of the biodiversity side, but also the facilities, was that really first stage of the Olympic movement. What I saw as a professional going up a notch compared to previous games. Brisbane in particular, from my understanding, the bid was very successful on the reuse and repurposing of venues. And I think we're going to see that a lot in LA, and that transition of LA being that next benchmark, which then paves the way for a very ambitious target the International Olympic Committee is setting for the Brisbane 2032 Games. So we see the Games as a real powerful driver for climate, environmental education, but also advocacy and thought leadership, particularly because it crosses so many people across their either love of sport as that one time a year, or you're part of it in terms of your daily culture, physical activity and well-being, that you have a connection to one of these sports just through your day-to-day life. So I'm really excited to see where the next 7 years goes and kind of what happens in LA to set the new standards for event organisers, and where organisations like us can support government, its stakeholders and network to make those actionable changes. Because, yeah, it's a beast of a project, and we know we're one part of a very large clog that's trying to achieve a lot.
And beyond 2032, do you think there's a case in terms of, let's think about the sustainability of sort of major events like beyond that curve, and particularly the Olympics? The Olympics has always been based in one city, and yes, of course, this Brisbane Olympics is going to have things going on in slightly more distant places. But is there a case longer term to really minimise the impact to turn Olympics into host nation rather than host city events?
Yeah, no, I can only speak kind of with my sports hat here. I know there's a lot of conversations of the benefits of that approach. And I think what we're seeing is these are multi-billion-dollar events, and they're a very large element of nation building. And you have to have significant benefits that come outside of the games. And I think where Brisbane is being very creative and very deliberate is making sure the legacy is there. And you can see it in terms of the transport projects, which are already underway or proposed, housing targets, built form and environment elements of green open space and well-being and physical activity. That's where I think host cities are going to find that competitive element, that there needs to be an actual generational benefit, not a one and done where we see those really kind of sad pictures of stadiums in decay 18 months after the games, and they basically become TikTok havens for explorers going behind the scenes, seeing what used to be in the world. So yeah, I find it's going to be a very fascinating space. And I just look at things like AFL Grand Final. That's always been at the MCG. Or you look at Formula One, they go across the network and have a pretty set establishment of venues where they can grow and there's a bit of consistency. Same with cricket and tennis with the 4 Grand Slams. So yeah, there's a bit in that one, Joel. It'll be really interesting to see where host nations and governments go and what is really interesting times globally that they're seeing in this world. So yeah, let's get the crystal ball out for that one, I reckon.
Yeah, I enjoy getting the crystal ball out regularly. It's my favourite pastime. In terms of just coming back to the present now, in terms of the sort of sporting codes active in Australia at the moment, can you talk a little bit about how they sit relative to each other in terms of their efforts in this sustainability space?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And it's one that we're trying to work as an advocacy and industry group to support. So a lot of sports are doing great things, particularly those that are more successful in terms of budget and resourcing. They're blessed to have the capability internally through partnerships, but also their event and participation framework to have a lot more impact in this space. So as Australians, we know like the AFL, Tennis Australia, Cricket Australia, there's these really large participation sports that have internal capabilities and are kind of really setting the benchmark between their day-to-day operations to what they're trying to achieve with their clubs and stakeholders, all the way through to what you see in January at the Australian Open, for example, and that innovation that drives. One of my biggest concerns is that sport and climate, it forms part of not business as usual, I would say, yet. So a climate role or a sustainability role, if it's within a smaller organisation, is absorbed into a HR role or a participation manager or a club development or finance and accounting, and potentially it only ends up being 0.2 of a headcount, and there's a very large responsibility that comes with that role. We look at things like mandatory reporting that many of your members and stakeholders will be seeing occurring in their spaces and places over the next couple of years. When you look at headcounts and revenue, we have a lot of sports and their partners and sponsors that are actually going to be wanting to see climate obligations fulfilled. And that's going to be a real interesting way as to how business and economy kind of set the standard as to going, we may not support your sport because you're not environmentally achieving the goals of what said corporate is potentially achieving. So that's a key part of my advocacy and that of my team and the boards in terms of how do we get this element in terms of business as usual, in terms of climate, sustainability and environment, similar to it is with diversity, inclusion, First Nations, child protection. And it's not that we want to create more resource challenges for the organisation. There's a lot of benefits by being environmentally sustainable, and a lot of that comes down to cost savings, operational benefits, whilst doing good for the environment. And that's just something we have to be really honest about. We can have that passion for environmental impact and change and ticking that box to say we've done great things, but a lot of people are very focused on the day-to-day operational elements of keeping the lights on, keeping their members happy, and running elite, well-participated events. So I'm really conscious of that balance of what we're trying to advocate and lead, but being part of that wider ecosystem that we have to form part of a business operations element a lot of the time, because there's just no resources out there for many of these organizations. And you look at sport, there's nearly 100 national sporting organizations, and take out the Olympic sports as well with the Australian Olympic Commission. When you go down, between 40 to 100 key sports are trying to drive change in this sector, and it's a huge ask for the industry and sector. And we try and do what we can do to support all of our members and stakeholders on the journey. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a snapshot, Joel, as to kind of the complexity I feel we sit as an industry organisation.
So putting resource constraints aside for a moment, what are the other hurdles and blockers to change in this space?
I would say a desire for change. So because it's not regulatory or part of legislation for most, that's one of the elements that I see sport has been really successful in progressing. So when there's been a regulatory requirement or a new standard or a new requirement, sport's always shown that leadership of being that leader within the business and community area. So that's a real constraint. And I'm fascinated to see where mandatory reporting goes after the first 3 years. And those of your listeners out there, in terms of mandatory reporting, that's quite a very complex federal initiative where the top 200 ASX companies now are reporting basically on their scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions. And it's having a very significant role in terms of what the minimum requirement will be for business and sport, which is business a lot of the time. When you look at 2027, 2028 and beyond, I feel that's where we need to really gear up and support our industry, our venue operators, facility managers, and those part of the sector to create that change. So yeah, it's not negativity in that, Joel, or anything. It's just one of those key elements that we just need to make sure that we're kind of putting this as an accountability requirement, but not impacting resources that business as usual in terms of running sport is put at risk. So yeah, it's an interesting topic, that one, mate.
I think we underestimate the noise, that just the cognitive load of everything that is going on in our world now, and the level of stimulation that we all kind of grapple with on a daily basis from social media and the news. And this is one of those issues that I think is so big and complex and overwhelming that people can disengage from, because they just kind of go, well, you know, how is what I'm doing going to make a difference? What kind of strategic messaging do you feel is most powerful to kind of cutting through the noise and getting people to really absorb this opportunity?
I would say historically the athlete's voice was the key driver in the early days, and you reflect back in contexts around Australia in terms of significant bushfires, flooding, and the impact of heat has happened on performance, fan experience, but also events actually not being able to occur to the level in which they're planned. And those athletes really getting out above the parapet, so to speak, and having that athlete voice to drive change. And this is where I put a lot of credit to organisations such as Frontrunners and Cricket for Climate and Footy for Climate, where they're really enabling that athlete's voice to come out at a sporting level that's relevant to their sector, to kind of have that backing of the code behind them. And I feel that's dropped off a lot, I would say, particularly during kind of that COVID transition and changing in global events. And sport, as you know, is very commercialised. And one of my fears is that athletes don't feel that comfort to kind of come up and speak out on issues as they once were 5 years ago, even, purely because there's such an important element in terms of their sustainability of their role and their corporate value, but also they're very restrained by the organisational beliefs of the organisational league in which they're a part of. So Yeah, that's a key element, Joel, in terms of the athlete's voice. We can never underrate the likes of Australian cricketers coming out speaking about the challenges that they're seeing abroad and kind of humanising it for the everyday person that's really trying to grapple with this. And I think athletes that talk about solar panels or heat pumps or batteries or transitioning to EVs, it just puts a real human lens to go, oh, that's an action I can take at home or within my work environment. Feel comfort in that because, someone I admire and have a lot of admiration for is putting that message out there. So that's probably the key one, I reckon, Joel, upon reflection. Good question, that one.
The key aspect of sport is competition, right? So that's driving its existence. Can we harness that to create a competition between the sporting codes around, greater performance in the sustainability space?
I'd love that. And I think there's some good examples, and it's going to pass me, but we look at Europe and European soccer clubs were very creative in terms of what they're trying to do in terms of the competition at a organisational level. I know a lot of this is just through my sport understanding. NFL teams particular, as they own and operate stadia, you can see how the constant investment in terms of NFL facilities are adapting to climate and sustainability initiatives and kind of the innovation that's setting a new standard in terms of that built form of where we go to support our favourite teams and fans. And it's a key element, and it's probably one I probably want to share that there's great work that's happened with Green Sports Alliance and Basis over in the UK and the US there, that we're trying to bring initiatives like Green Sports Day to Australia in October. And there's probably a good catalyst of literacy and education and awareness where we can start programs such as that competition. Because, you hit the nail on the head, Joel. Competition's our best friend in the sporting sector, and it's what keeps the performance going and going. So, it's been done, and I'd love to take that as a thought after this as to how we can harness that and get some of your members' ideas on that. That'd be awesome, Joel.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think generally the concept of gamification is very close to competition and sport, right? So any way you can turn something like this into a game that can be played for joy and fun and where there's an incentive and you can win, I think that's hugely motivating. I think we get, when we think about these kind of changes to our way of being, we get often kind of bogged down either in depressing statistics or in the bureaucracy of the change. And I think we forget to make things fun. And, sport's fun. That's a realm where we could really make a difference.
Yeah, I like that. And probably a shout out to one of our partners, Vic Return, the container deposit scheme. So we partnered with them earlier this year, and we're seeing that as a real driver of kind of club to club potential in terms of the kind of fiscal benefit you get through recycling in terms of 10 cents a can or a bottle. That really then shapes potentially kind of where you're at in your footy league or your netball league. And we're kind of working at innovations in which we can harness competition in terms of that circularity recycling element and that competitive nature of the club next door or the one down the street, because, they're always competing against the best facilities or clubhouse or who has the best canteen or lighting. And we're finding that's a real sweet spot in our initial consultation and research. So it's picking programs such as that, Joel, I reckon, is probably that AFL clubs or NRL clubs or the Super Netball League got all their clubs together and the NBL and started to really benchmark themselves against each other as to what they're doing. It would be, there's definitely something in that, Joel. I like that.
Yeah, fantastic. We can talk more about that. We spoke in the lead up to this podcast about how our jobs are similar, for both of us, where really facilitating networks of change and development in our related spheres. I mean, I know the answer to this question, but I'm interested in your opinion, why are networks specifically important to driving change? Like, why is this the model through which it happens?
I would say without our network and supportive members would not have had the success and influence we've had to where we are in 2025 and beyond. And I say that because our network is one that shares their leadership, but also their challenges. And where we get a lot of that thought leadership and leadership through the network is those larger sports and organizations sharing all their IP or providing that free advice, basically, so the next organization can take that leadership step with comfort that there's other people that have been through the challenges. And without our network, I feel like I call 1 to 2 members a day, referring them into other organizations or picking their brains on event content or learning and development or where to next. And even after this call, I've got a couple of follow-ups that the network is what sustains us. And that's what I really like about your organization and ours, that you can go to your events and you know you've got like-minded individuals that have a passion, and that's where we grow and learn and have a community to us. And as a not-for-profit industry organisation, members and partners are significantly critical to our success, but it's the networks that they create and foster is invaluable. So, yeah, I love it, to be honest. And people you meet and the ideas you share is keeps me going every day in these roles.
How do we strengthen those networks around these types of issues? I mean, you and I do this work every day, and as much as it's amazing, there's also challenges that you have. How can we improve?
The collaboration and partnerships and conversations such as yourself reaching out to invite me on your podcast is the first step. I feel organisations such as Sports Environment Alliance, partnerships and collaboration is our success. So if there's, particularly when it comes to the events, venues, facility spaces of where we're hosting sport and entertainment, I can learn so much by your sector. And I'm just reflecting on a conversation I had with one of your stakeholders that was innovating in energy efficient generators, for example. And that's probably a segment that's not being explored as much in the sporting world as what it is in the entertainment venue space as it relates to the requirements of your event delivery. So it's particularly that innovation we can share through collaboration and broadening our networks that is our ultimate key to success. And personally, I can't work in a silo. These conversations keep me going, and I just learn so much from our conversations, Joel, and your network and what you provide through your conferences, in particular annually. As I mentioned to you, there was a few game-changing ideas that came out of your last conference that I shared with you, and just that is priceless in terms of our success and growth. So all over it, Joel, in terms of keeping these conversations going.
That's really, really flattering feedback. Thanks, Adam. Let's talk now about some case studies. There's got to be some really shiny examples of sporting codes excelling in the sustainability space. Do you want to share a few of those?
No, absolutely. And I'll probably reflect it back on kind of the venue space and one of our foundation partners, Melbourne Cricket Club, that's at the Melbourne Cricket Ground that many of your listeners will be aware of. And the case study and leadership in which they provided in terms of recycling game day and event waste, particularly from the fans out there enjoying their hot chips and pies and catering, and what they've been able to do in terms of removing organics out of landfill and repurposing that on site through technological innovation to create fertilizer and nutrients for the soils within Yarra Park. I know that's been a really important case study because what we chatted about earlier is a lot of golf clubs or surf life-saving clubs or other organisations can piggyback off that innovation and technology where they're instilling that within their kitchens and minimising their kind of impact to waste to landfill. That's probably one in terms of kind of the waste one that I really enjoy, and that's probably just one I reflect on almost from started 10 years ago. But particularly from a community level, there's so many clubs that are making that transition to battery after doing that investment in solar, and purely as it relates to energy efficiency of lighting up their fields and places and spaces. I can go through countless ones in terms of the infrastructure, but also share kind of a waste management program that we did in Western Australia with the Western Australian government, where we really worked with 5 clubs, ranging from the AFL clubs there down to a community soccer club down at Vassy to Western Force in the rugby union there, and basically educated behavioural change elements that could be implemented either within their organisation, their community clubs, all throughout their game day experience. And that's everything from signage to resources. And that's been really replicated across the board. So I share a bit on waste there, Joel, and the energy transition, but that's just a few in terms of have really been game changers in terms of giving that leadership to the wider network. And yeah, ones I really enjoy sharing.
So that's the present and the past. What does the future of action look like in this space? So there's kind of blue sky ideas that are out there in the world that in Australia we're behind on and could do a bit of catching up.
Oh, one that's really popping up in recent chats is that battery transition and the technology that's coming out to reduce the costs that are involved and the carbon footprint and impacts as it relates to traditional energy use. The way batteries are scaling up in terms of being able to service a whole leisure centre or pool or large sections of stadia and venues, that's going to be an absolute game changer as the affordability comes down and innovation, which almost feels like it happens every 6 weeks to 6 months, is new tech coming out in that space. And the venue operations element that comes through that technology and AI, I think it's going to be really important in the kind of the worlds that we live in, Joel. Transitioning in the energy one as well in terms of the EV side of thing and fleet management and event transportation. Myself, I've been to a few EV expos recently, and when you look at kind of the transport sector of large Volvo trucks all the way through to player and guest sedans that are moving people to and from events and hotels, that's going to be a significant game changer. And that's one which will then change the energy grid, the requirements that is required to be at facilities in terms of charging capability. And I feel that's a real interesting element that we're going to see in terms of energy transition and legacy, where sport can be a leader, be it at your local sporting ground or regional fields, all the way through to large stadia and the stadiums in which your events are being hosted. So that's kind of happening as it is at the moment, Joel. But yeah, AI, I touched on that. I find that's going to be fascinating in the climate environment space as it relates to innovating in data to better inform and make change in terms of operations is going to be a real critical one that I see happening, and a lot's happening behind the scenes that I haven't been privy to, but just hearing exciting things in the works. So yeah, tough question, that one, Joel. I wish I was a futurist and could share a bit more on that one, but yeah, just on the key ones that many of your listeners would probably be aware of.
Adam, it's been great to have you with us today. Just before we go, how do people get involved with Sports Environment Alliance?
Oh, well, it's simple as reaching out via our website or to me directly. We have a range of opportunities if you want to be a member, partner with us with your brand, or lead us with events, networking opportunities, any forms of collaboration as it relates to the sport, leisure and recreation sector. Would love for you to reach out to me directly, and I'm happy to share with you, Joel, my contact details for your listeners or members to get in touch. So please don't be shy, and it's all about innovation and sharing ideas and growth with us. So super grateful for this opportunity, Joel. So thank you.
No, thank you very much. And for any VMA members, I'm sure Adam will be at events coming up around the country to connect with you. So I'm sure he would appreciate the opportunity to touch on everything we've discussed today. But that's it for now, and we will see you next time on the next stage.
Thank you.